In the late 1800s and early 1900s, segregation and discrimination towards African Americans was at one of its worst periods in history. Out of the civil rights activists, W.E.B. DuBois was one of the most effective. Handling what were current day issues such as segregation and discrimination, he has contributed to this issue in multiple forms. He has created groups and organizations such as the NAACP. In addition, he attacked the issue of discrimination by writing and speaking. For example, his books Soul of Black Folk and The Crisis were literary demonstrations on his views and opinions. In this documentary, we will explore the life of W.E.B. DuBois and his legacy as a civil rights activist and leader. W.E.B. DuBois was born February 23, 1868, and died on August 27, 1963. W. Du Bois is widely recognized as a significant figure for his political and social justice and for his literary imagination, and for his pioneering scholarly work. Growing up, Du Bois' educational environment was not the best as he described in The Souls of Black Folk.
Du Bois attended Fisk University in Nashville, then later went on to Harvard, in which he met a professor by the name of Williams James that influenced him. He would teach his class about the black suffrage in America. That was a fire that started W.E. Du Bois on his mission to solve the civil rights problem. During W.E.B. Du Bois' legacy, the time period was very vast, and he contributed from the time period of the 1890s to the 1960s.
He grew up with the belief that society should be one of love and peace. Between the years 1900 and 1915 were the most prominent years in his life as a civil rights activist. Within these years, he demonstrated his goals of total equality through physical, verbal, and mental methods.
In these years, he has received many awards, created activist groups, and much more to aid the ending discrimination towards African Americans. Some of the awards include the Spring Garland Medal that was given to him from the NAACP, the International Lenin Peace Prize, and in 1992, the United States Postal Service honored Du Bois with his portrait on a postage stamp.
W.E.B. Du Bois made many contributions to civil rights movements. Some of his contributions fell into the category of the boost of education. W. Du Bois strived for raising educational standards for African Americans. He not only wanted them to achieve goals of a stable education, but one that could place them in the real world. W.E.B. Du Bois was sold on the fact that education was the best way for a black man to become prestigious in America. He often wrote about this in his newsletter, The Crisis. For example, he would insert practice literary tests so that more black people could vote.
W.E.B. Du Bois was mainly against the famous Jim Crow laws. In U.S. history, the Jim Crow laws were enacted by southern states in the beginning of the 1880s. This legalized segregation between black and whites. The Supreme Court ruling in 1896 in Plessy v. Ferguson that separated facilities for whites and blacks were constitutional encouraged the passage of discriminatory laws that wiped out the gains made by blacks during Reconstruction. Railways and streetcars, public waiting rooms, restaurants, boarding houses, theaters, and public parks were segregated. Separate schools, hospitals, and other public institutions, generally of inferior quality, were designated for the blacks. One main action in response to the Jim Crow laws was the Niagara Movement. Due to the Jim Crow laws being a direct action against these rights that blacks were fighting for, the Niagara Movement had two main goals for the African American community. One was that it wanted full equality all around. Two was that the movement would be a direct response to the Jim Crow laws. For blacks in the early 1900s, their voice was continuously suppressed and were blocked off from political and government associations.
The Niagara Movement pushed for African American rights such as freedom of speech. Freedom of speech and criticism would allow blacks to speak publicly through their voices and newspapers. an unfettered and unsubsidized press, which is the ability to freely write what they want without restriction, manhood suffrage, giving African Americans the right to vote for who they want and not being part of the slave owners' vote, the abolition of all caste distinctions based simply on race and color, the recognition of principles of human brotherhood as a practical present creed. Blacks wanted to be able to aid each other and create a support system so that they as community could reach a higher standard for themselves. The recognition of the highest and best training as a monopoly of no class or race. A belief in the dignity of labor. African Americans believe that their work should only be used for payment and their own benefit. United effort to realize these ideas were under wise and courageous leadership. Many short-term impacts included events such as the NAACP movement and multiple sit-outs. More importantly, he publicly spoke out on how to improve black societies. He did this mainly through this newsletter, The Crisis. The Crisis was a newsletter that advised blacks of what was going on around them, upcoming events, and other things such as the literary test and short stories to further black knowledge and voting ability. Other short-term impacts that were happening were the public sit-ins. On February 1st, 1960, this new tactic was added to the peaceful activist strategy in which 4 African-American college students walked up to an all-whites counter and asked for free coffee. This sparked a whole movement in which people were trying to beat the system of segregation, not with violence, but with peace.
In the long run, W.E.B. DuBois was an inspiration as a leader for others to follow in his footsteps. As one of the main pioneers in desegregation, he has brought America as a whole to a more ethnic environment. In today's society, we no longer embrace segregation, and now we include more diversity in each and everyone's community. W.E.B. DuBois has set an example for not just African Americans, but for Asian, Hispanic, German, Spanish, French Americans, that we all can live together in equality. To this day, the NAACP continues to run and celebrate all African American achievements. Just recently, they've celebrated their 46th annual NAACP Image Awards. Due to all this magnificent work, desegregation began to take a turn for the best, with the NAACP coming along and helping kids get an amazing education. Not only did it work for that, but the NAACP is fully functional to this day and works out many problems that involve the African American people. In conclusion, as a leader, W.E.B. DuBois laid out a path for others to follow. He was set to reach a destination of equality and enlightenment. For his bravery, for his selflessness, and for his extensive support to the African American race, we are proud to title him as an inspiration and a leader and in all, a legacy.